right, we should be going live now. Give people some time to get into the room. All right. So, give everybody some time. Let's see. All right. So, greetings, everybody. My name is Andre Davis. I am a 2022 DC mayoral candidate here based in Capitol Hill, Ward 6. Today, I wanted to go live to talk about my newly released platform and as well as answer more questions and handle comments that people may have had in regards to my platform. So many of you have been reaching out. So many of you have been donating, spreading the word through social media. I'm very appreciative of everything that everyone is doing to push the movement forward. If you haven't today, please join the movement. You can head over to my website. The link is in my bio. It's www.andre4dc.com. Again, it's Andre4, the word FORDC.com. You can head over to my platform and vision and some of the things that I'll be talking about today in regards to the district and where it stands. Let's get into it. So, what we have is a 7-point plan or 7 areas that I wanted to highlight. And while I'm pulling it up, I want to make sure that I can see it. But essentially, give people some background about me for people who have not heard my spiel. My name is Andre Davis, native Washingtonian, 4th generation Washingtonian, hailing from Southeast Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill specifically. I grew up in Washington, D.C., went to public school in Washington, D.C. I'm a product of the D.C. public school system. I spent up to a decade teaching in the classroom for District of Columbia Public Schools, as well as a charter school. I currently am an education consultant here in the district, based around academic retention, academic education plans, and basically advocating for parents who need to learn to navigate the public school system. So that's what my work has been in the last couple of years. I'm helping families who need advocacy in the education realm. Because as we know, and as we can see, now more than ever, parents and stakeholders, including educators and students, need advocacy for the public school system. So I'm going to pull up my website and can see if I can pull it up here on the screen. Let's see. So okay. So it looks like I'm not going to be able to pull that up. So you guys can follow along on my website, but I'll just discuss it a little bit. So as I said, my vision is very simple. Not to be downplayed, but in my opinion, it's a very simple process. of restoring the district to where it needs to be. I think so many people fail to realize that along with the COVID pandemic, even before the COVID pandemic, we had a lot of nuances in the city that necessarily don't positively contribute to the growing population that we have here in the district. So part of that is the first thing that I want to talk about, of course, is a hot topic, is education. And with education, as I said, I was a teacher for up to a decade in the classroom. My mother is a teacher, taught in the classroom before me, which is part of the reason why I wanted to become an educator. I graduated high school very early due to having a support group of people around me that instilled in me that education was the key. And I still believe that. I still believe that education is the key to preparing our youth and young adults and even older adults to accessing equitable resources in the city. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is my platform for education. So my education platform consists of building better schools. We see so often that there's a disparity between schools in certain areas of the district and not other areas. And to be very specific, based on ward demographics, we know where the economic strengths in the city lies. We know where the economic hotspots are, and we also know where the economic parts of the city where we need to kind of push economic growth and spur economic growth. So for education, it's the same process. We see areas in the city where the educational structure, buildings, the resources, the parental involvement, we see in the city where those things are hotspots, where we have a ton of engagement from parents, where we have the resources, where the schools are already renovated, where the teachers are doing, supported in the ways that they need to be supported. But then there's a flip side to that. We see also in other areas of the city where we don't have parental engagement. We don't have teachers who are supported. We don't have buildings that are up to code and able to spur that educational advancement that we're looking for in our young scholars. So with that being said, my number one thing for education is to build better schools. How do I plan to do that? So I would love to support equitable funding and adequate resources for K through 12 public schools so that we can prepare every child for a valuable and active future. And when I say that, I remember when I was a young kid and what used to happen with me, I'd get bored in the classroom, not because the teacher was at fault, but because A, we didn't have resources, B, we were cramped into small classes, or back then we had centers. So we could hear the class from next door, we could hear the class from around the corner because of how the building was built. So for me, I know it, with the new math, as everyone calls it, Eureka math, the new math that everybody hates. But with the new math or Eureka math, the curriculum is based on basically putting concept development and application processes. So for me, we have to be able to pump into these schools and push into these children. So some of the ways I want to fight for education to build better schools is I would most definitely in mayoral control over DC public schools. There's no reason the progress that we've made, there's no reason for the mayor to autonomously control the public school system. It makes it very difficult for the mayor to have that, absolute control over the district when the mayor does not have that pedagogy, that background in education. That would be the equivalent to me, running a hospital. I have no knowledge of the medical system and the ins and outer workings of it. To run a hospital directly and have that complete control. So I liken that situation and scenario to the same situation and scenario of the mayor having mayoral control, the end all be all say so over the public school system when the mayor has never taught in a classroom. The mayor does not come from an education background. The mayor does not communicate with stakeholders and constituents. We've seen it over and over again. We've seen it in regards to the chancellor selection. We've seen it in regards to contract negotiations and collective bargaining. We've seen it right now with the return to schools. We've seen how these things affect the entire public school system when one person is making that decision and there's no checks and balances to make sure that we have accountability. My second thing would be to replace the impact evaluation system with a more equitable, relevant, and considerable evaluation system. So, with that being said, replace the impact evaluation system. With that being said, what we have is we know that impact came out. We know why it came out. We know how it's come out, and a lot of the times we oftentimes don't understand the effects that evaluations have on teachers. But myself, knowing, being an educator, that impact evaluation my first year was was terrible. I think I had only taught. I had got hired in August, and then the next thing you know, a week later, I was getting impacted. Now, mind you, it was illegal to do that at the time, or not illegal, but it was against the rules per se, or the policies of what proper impacts were. But my principal figured this brilliant idea to do it and weaponized impact. And I think that impact is still, to some degree, very weaponized. And I would love to see a new system in its place that is more equitable, more relevant, and it considers factors that educators and administrators have no control over. The next bullet point in education, about my platform, is increasing teacher pay. Um, I would love to increase the teacher pay because teachers are rock stars, hands down. And this includes substitute teachers. I find it very disrespectful that the mayor gloated about the minimum wage, or slightly above minimum wage, pay scale that she allocated to substitutes. She ended up pushing the budget for salary to $17 an hour, which is about $1.80 above the current minimum wage. And I found it to be asinine. I found it to be very selfish to only push that up when the admin premium for what we consider as teachers, or the position as ET15 in the District of Columbia Public Schools, ET15s for admin premium, the pay is $40 an hour. So my understanding would be to essentially say, hey, why are we not paying substitutes a minimum of $40 an hour? The substitutes asked for $300 a day, which, if you do the math for a teacher's tour duty, it's 8 o'clock to 3:30. So you have 8 o'clock to 3:30, and then essentially when you have that 8 o'clock to 3:30, that's about I think 6.5 hours or 7.5 hours. I'm sorry, 7.5 hours. You have 7.5 hours. When you do the math, 7.5 times 40, you get 300. So I think it was selfish and not as connected as it needed to be for the mayor to gloat about pushing the substitute teacher budget to set, or salary, to $17 an hour, or $126 or $136 a day. So my goal, if elected, would be to push the teacher pay scale, as well as the requirements for licensure, as well as the pay scale for substitute teachers, which currently we're seeing are rock stars right along necessary with teachers. Um, Next thing would be to increase funding for out of school programming, so that all DC children, regardless of ward, have quality school programming. What we often see is we see some schools have better programming than other schools. Some schools, of course, based on demographic, some schools may not be the most art prone schools. Some may be more tech prone, and that's quite okay. But what we're seeing now is we're starting to see schools that don't even have the basic programs for out of school time. Well, the basic programs that they have, um, for extracurricular activities. Like there's schools where everyone in the school is great with an iPad or great with a computer, yet there's no tech club. There's not enough computers to go around. There's not a one-to-one ratio. A lot of people oftentimes, a lot of a lot of people, a lot of people oftentimes don't understand that in order to provide an education for a student, we need to make sure that they have the resources. Um, you can't expect a child to learn what they're supposed to learn, and there's no resources to back them up. If Even if let's take it outside of COVID, before the pandemic, I was in the classroom and we still had to share computers. There was not a one-to-one ratio. So that makes it difficult when you have children who are behavior prone or who have special needs or need specialized education strategies in order for them to basically digest the information that we're giving them. And without those resources, we fail them even before we start teaching. And I just want to take the time to shout out all of the teachers who are educating their classes, educating their students, regardless of the resources that they receive, regardless of the support that they receive from the teachers. I want to make that very clear that I stand with teachers in the District of Columbia, as well as across the country, but particularly right now in the District of Columbia. I'm very, very proud to know and to be friends and to be associates with the teachers who are doing their job consistently, who are going into these unsafe buildings and saying, I'm still going to do my job because that child needs me or that person needs me. Um, the last two, I would love to increase the allotment for out of boundary student enrollment. There's certain schools that have those tech programs or have those arts and theater programs that may not be in the neighborhood or the boundary school for a student. Should we say, hey, you like the arts, your school, your local neighborhood school does not provide that program, don't worry about it. I think that's a disservice to our students. And I believe that we need to look at that process for out of boundary. So I would love to increase the allotment of out of boundary student enrollment so that students who are interested in other areas outside of the areas that their schools and their neighborhood schools specialize in, they can actually go and receive that education as well. The last two things that go right on top of the previous notes are speed up the modernization timelines. The modernization timeline for school renovations has been lackluster. We've seen it done in phases. We've seen it pushed where you have the windows are going to be done one year, then we're going to do the doors, and then we're going to do a paint job. And then what we have is then we'll come in and do the HVAC system or the heavy lifting over the summer when people are gone. I think that process in itself has been drawn out and it's taken some time to really get a lot of the schools modernized to the way that we want them. Um, the last two is to increase art and library sciences budgets. So we want to increase the live art and library science budgets for the K through 12 public schools because without the arts, a lot of students are falling behind. A lot of students are able to grasp concepts and educational topics because of the arts. When we look at the social media, when we look at TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, when we look at the social media content that some of our youth are producing, that is an art. That is a tech skill in itself. That is an art skill in itself. And library sciences goes right along with the arts because I'm a big person for streamlined learning. So science, technology, reading, engineering, arts, and mathematics, not just the typical STEM or STEAM that we've seen, but streamline learning. And the last thing is reopening the vacant Spingarn High School as a vocational school because the Spingarn High School was a vocational school at one point in time and it still sits there empty. But that's one thing that we don't have in the public school education system here. We do not have real vocational tech trade and learning center. And I would love to get some funding behind the Spingarn High School to turn it into a vocational tech trade and learning center for not just the youth, but for also adults and young adults. So I'll take a question that we have from the chat. If you're elected mayor, how will you leverage the funds made available through the American Rescue Plan to make sure that all DC students at all schools are one-to-one? So we had the ARPA funds. We had those funds. We still have those funds. It's as simple as providing uh, laptops. It's basically making sure that we have those resources and actually allocating that budget. I'm not sure where the budget has gone in regards to the ARPA funds, but to my knowledge, we don't know exactly what's being done with the funds. And the current administration is going against what my mantra is of act right, which is accountability, communication, and trust. We have not seen accountability. We have not seen people take accountability for their actions or misactions. We have not seen people communicate properly. We see it with the COVID positive rate. I guess that's not a hotline. It's just the email or the data reports. We see that they're behind. We see that sometimes they don't even acknowledge that people are positive, or we get those messages a week or two later, and by then it's too late. And the lack of communication, the lack of accountability creates ultimately a lack of trust. No one's going to trust you if they can't receive information from you in a timely fashion. No one's going to trust you if you're making mistakes and you do not account for those mistakes and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. We made a mistake. We got it wrong." And it's nothing wrong with saying, "Hey, we got it wrong," because to me, that just says that you have respect for your constituents and you're actually pushing for people to give you constructive feedback, which is ultimately what a mayor should be doing. So the next move that we're going to get into is housing, and that's a hot topic for people. Um, as we know, the housing crisis is big. That's a part of the housing crisis nationwide. We've seen gentrification happen. We've seen hyperdevelopment happen. We've seen a lot of particular nuances that affect the the housing market in general, and how who buys a house when they buy a house. The COVID pandemic has drained a lot of funds. It's taken income from people. It's taken people's homes. It's forced people to move back in with family. It's forced people to seek government aid or assistance for rental assistance. It's done a lot in regards to hurting the housing or adding to the housing crisis per se. Excuse me. So my ultimate goal for my housing platform is to take hold of the district's housing crisis. Right now, we are currently in a housing crisis. We're in the midst of it. And affordable housing should be a reality to all residents, no matter their socioeconomic status. So what happens is we're seeing essentially the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we're seeing it in the result of not only education, but also housing. The rising cost of housing in the city has become a recurring issue for all residents in every ward, not just wards where we typically see people, not on the higher end of the economic spectrum. We're talking about wards that have a strong economic strength or stronghold. We're seeing those particular wards also suffer in the housing, in regards to housing. So as mayor, I would love to introduce initiatives that truly amount or truly increase the amount of affordable housing in regards to all residents in all wards. So to run down this list, I would love to introduce or increase the percentage of ADUs for apartment communities within the city. I would love to build more single family homes. I want to specifically fight for the unhoused and our underhoused residents, because far too often the current administration has gotten it wrong on that particular level. We see bulldozing of encampments. We've seen people, our underhoused and unhoused residents, we've seen them dying of hypothermia. We've seen them dying of COVID. We've seen them struggling with mental illnesses. We've seen them doing things that are out of character, and it's exacerbated by the fact that they are underhoused or unhoused. So my biggest fight would be to make sure that every resident has a home in the city or a place to call home. Next bullet point would be to reconfigure and explore current rental increase laws. We're starting to see some of the rental increases across the country where the rental freezes are starting to dissipate. And you're starting to see landlords kind of putting residents in tricky situations or loopholes per se, because during the pandemic, a lot of people were behind on their rent, so they were unable to renegotiate or renew their leases. So now they're on a month to month being charged monthly fees and things of that nature. So we're seeing that now. People are trying, now they're getting back to, having income, having sufficient income or steady income. And now we're seeing landlords pull legal loopholes where they're like, well, okay, cool. I'll give you a lease for a year, but, it's going to be $500 more, or it's going to be $300 more. So I would love to reconfigure and explore the current rental increase laws, especially the ones that have been affected or would be affected by the pandemic. And the last thing is to allocate more program funding and provide more resources to house district government workers, district educators, and first-time homebuyers. That is one thing that I think the city fails on. I think the city ends up missing that mark, because we do have programs for first-time homebuyers. We do have programs, for teachers. We do have programs for government workers. However, we are starting to see a mass exodus of our workers. They're moving to PG County. They're moving to Alexandria, Arlington. They're moving to further Charles County. They're moving further down and further out away from the city. So by increasing or allocating more program funding to those programs, we can bring some of those residents back and really create a true DC. We got another question. The money in the budget for Spingarn. How will you apply pressure to make sure Spingarn is renovated to serve the purpose of why it was closed, to be a training ground for the DC streetcar? So we've seen the DC streetcar. In my opinion, it is a lackluster project. Let's be honest. It's a very lackluster project. We spent almost $2 billion to build the streetcar, to keep the streetcars running. And the complete plans of having a all DC line would be very costly. And at this point, I think that there's a better way to use the Spingarn building. There's a better way to basically, we can still have the training grounds for the DC streetcars. We can still train mechanics. We can still train drivers. We can still train younger residents, the youth, as well as adults to work to work within the streetcars. But I don't think that it should solely be placed as the streetcar training ground. I think that school is much bigger, and it houses much more space. There's a ton of other things or vocations and trades that could be utilized or discovered within that school. So the one way that I would apply pressure to make sure that it's renovated is to make sure that when we look at that school modernization list, Spingarn is a high priority, and that we put some resources into Spingarn, and that we collectively collaborate to make sure that the residents are behind it. They're understanding what's going on at all times, and that we get it open in time in the least amount of taxpayer dollars. The next point on the platform is public health. What we have for public health. So basically, essentially, we've seen in the last 15 years or so, um, 20 years, we've seen hospitals close in DC, with the DC General Hospital campus, which was then turned into a family homeless shelter, which was then demolished and turned into a campus for luxury apartments that they are currently building now. Those luxury apartments are unaffordable by the average resident in DC. And I think it's a shame that a lot of those families that were in the DC General Hospital shelter are not able to live in the place that is being put in its vicinity. Um, they're continuously building that place, and I think that we need to focus on building more hospitals. Now, um, I believe that residents don't place a strong emphasis on their health primarily because we do not have adequate medical facilities and hospitals within an appropriate distance of our homes. I know for Ward 6, DC General serviced Ward 6 as well as Ward 7. Providence Hospital serviced Ward 5. And Ward 8 continued to fall behind in regards to public health matters because they had issues with their medical facility. So now the city is going to build a new hospital facility. It's a partnership between the George Washington Hospital and United Medical Health. So they're building a new hospital facility at the St. Elizabeth campus, but it will not be open until 2024 in full capacity. The ambulatory care for the ambulance and emergency room will be open in 2023. So I strongly believe that that will change the outlook of public health in the city. And even though that's an amazing advancement, I don't think it's enough. We still need to do more in order to build a positive healthcare system in the city. With the pandemic still raging on, I think it's even more important for residents to have appropriate facilities within their areas, within their neighborhoods. We're talking about urgent cares. We're talking about clinics. We're talking about community centers. A lot of those things, they are available, but the resources, once again, it's a resource issue. How much of the resources can we allocate to these programs, and what oversight can we provide to make sure that these programs are actually working effectively for the residents? So, in order to promote public health initiatives and have the residents buy into it, I think we must build and maintain appropriate medical facilities throughout all of the wards. So if I was elected, I would increase the healthcare programming throughout all of the communities, 1 through 8. I would establish a new communication system that keeps residents informed on health news and services all around the district. I would ensure that all district residents have adequate healthcare plans as well as the resources to utilize those plans. Of course, we will continue to adhere to the CDC guidelines regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would also like to establish a more efficient and safe way to distribute COVID rapid tests, because anyone who's been in a COVID rapid test line, whether it's at the fire stations, which were last minute sites, by the way, or the library, the lines are not 6 feet. Like, you do not have 6 feet of space between you and the next person. You guys are usually hovered on top of each other. They usually run out of tests because the database is not updated consistently. We oftentimes see so many people. We see so many people in those lines, and no one knows if they have a test or not. So for me, I just want to make sure that people are not contracting COVID trying to go get a test. And I think that's something that the current administration has not really paid attention to. The logistics of it. You do see members of the Green Team. You see members out there from DHS. You see them, the Department of Health, DC Health. You see people out there, but they're not really saying, hey, make sure you guys are 6 feet of space. Because essentially, let's take my neighborhood. I know that we distribute rapid tests at Engine Company 8 on C Street. It's a residential neighborhood, so there is no space for everyone to stand 6 feet apart. For me, I think what the United States government has done in regards to mailing out COVID tests to every household or every person is something that the district should have looked into in regards to distributing these tests. If if people cannot leave their house or they're scared to leave their homes or they're not vaccinated but they still want to do their due diligence, why is it that a person has to travel to a specific location when we should just be dropping them off at their doorsteps? We could utilize those resources and time a lot more effectively. It would minimize the transmission rates, and people would not have to go out into the community to figure out if they have COVID or not. And the last but not least is to allocate more resources to mental health agencies and organizations. I think that's something that we fall short on and have fallen short on in the district in regards to mental health. We see police officers, resource officers. We see resource officers from MPD respond to mental health crisis. We see those crisis intervention officers come out, the CIOs. We see them come out and oftentimes, yeah, they're trained, but how deeply rooted is their training? I have a younger brother who is paranoid schizophrenic, and there's a lot of time where we have to kind of figure out, if he goes outside or if he goes into the community and he's, by himself because he's fully capable of doing so. But if he goes out into the community, sometimes we worry about, if a neighbor will call the police because, he's doing something that is basically a symptom of his paranoid schizophrenia. So I want to make sure that all of our residents have access to mental health resources. People who are affected by those illnesses, educators, students, young adults, people who work for the government. These are the things that I think that we need to pay more attention on. If you guys have any questions, you can just send them into the chat, and I'll pick them up. Economics is the next touching point. So we're going to talk about economics. So economics is very simple. I just want to push economic growth, recovery, and innovation in all communities with a prioritized emphasis on addressing cross-community disparities. So when I say that, what I'm saying is this. I want to basically make sure that we can grow our economy, sustain our economy, and do it in innovative measures. And I want to place that emphasis on some of those communities that have economic disparities. East of the river, there's so many brilliant residents over there that have businesses, that have ideas for businesses, that have ideas to help the government or help the city. Yet there's no funding. There's minimal funding. There's minimal resources, or they're typecast where you have various offices like the Office of Racial Equity, where you have that office where they're specifically placing an emphasis on 7 and 8. And it's like, do we want to always kind of highlight the emphasis on economics and race? Because economics or race is actually not the only standard that is being held to a lot of people. It's economics, it's education level, it's, it's where you live, how you live, it's your lifestyle. All of these things go into the economic strength for DC. So for me, these are some of the things that I want to focus on in order to recover and continue to grow our economy after COVID or after the pandemic subsides. I want to make sure that I lower taxes for DC residents, making doing business in DC more efficient. The process to do business in DC is not necessarily streamlined in an effective manner, and I think that we would benefit by placing a positive system or a more effective system in its place. Supporting small businesses, protecting the creative economy with go-go music, with our artists, visual artists, with our digital artists now, with the promotion or push of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. With these things coming out, the creative economy is in a very strong position to bounce back uh, more quickly than other industries. So protecting the creative economy is huge on my list. Making city procurement equitable and inclusive, and halting any this is a big one, halting any demolition plans for the historic Robert F. Kennedy Stadium. And there's a blog post that I will be posting very soon that talks about my ideas and vision for the RFK Stadium. The RFK Stadium is near and dear to my heart. I grew up down the street from the RFK Stadium, or up the street from the RFK Stadium, and it's a sight for sore eyes to see it falling apart and there not be a considerable plan in place for it to be renovated, redeveloped, reallocated, used in another effective purpose. So please be on the lookout for my blog post. The blog post will have everything in it um, in regards to what I would like to do with the RFK Stadium. Let's look at transportation. So transportation. Transportation is big. As we saw the general manager of Metro step down. He's retiring. So someone will have to fill his place. But nonetheless, Metro is a strong transit agency in this region. Um, and we should make sure that we use Metro to its fullest extent and that we partner with Metro to its fullest extent. So DC is by far, in my opinion, one of the most navigable cities in America. You're able to navigate through DC as long as you know that it is a grid and it goes numbers and letters, and there are four quadrants, and each quadrant has a number and a letter. So you can be on First and A Street of Northeast, of Southeast, of Southwest, of particular streets. You can be on the first street of each quadrant. You can be on an A street in each quadrant. So, um, me looking at the District of Columbia and how it's broken down into wards and having a strong transit system, it hurts my heart to see people that don't have fair, equitable access to public transportation. It affects the economy because some people are unable to afford cars. And if I was, if I was a resident in the city coming in, I probably would not buy a car because traffic tickets are extremely high. We're pushing at $150 per photo enforcement ticket. And unfortunately, district residents are left to foot that bill due to the Clean Hands Act. So for people who are district residents, you cannot do business in the city if you have tickets. And the mayor and her administration have started to boot cars and tow cars now. It subsided from the pandemic, so she started to boot and tow cars. But there's a bigger issue at why people are not paying these tickets. They're unable to pay the tickets. A lot of people cannot. They can't afford it. They're not making the amount of money or income that they need in order to cover those extra costs. And let's face it, every week there's a new camera in a new part of the city. Sometimes you see a camera, you'll see a camera, and you'll see the camera pop out of nowhere. You'll see a new camera, and then they'll put up a photo enforced sign within 30 days, which is, I believe, is the rule, within 30 days. So the whole point is, you guys, as a person who is living in the city and being a resident, if I was new here, I wouldn't buy a car. I would strictly rely on public transportation. You have the bikes, mopeds, you have scooters. There's a ton of different ways to get around the city, and because the way that DC is set up, it's easy to navigate through the city. But my transportation woes basically stem from not allowing residents equitable access. People who live off of the heart of Georgia Avenue have easier access to metro buses and metro stations than, let's say, somebody who lives in the Deanwood neighborhood where you have to walk a specific amount of time to get to either Deanwood or Minnesota Avenue stations. Or you have to walk because the buses are not running because Metro is operating on a Saturday schedule now. So some of the plans that I have to offer equitable access for transportation include working with Metro to increase transportation services to isolated and underserved communities, working with the DC Circulator to include routes outside of the service area of focus or areas that are not serviced by Metro. I would like to provide DC residents with monthly transit credits. So for our working class citizens, where the rent is already high based on the housing crisis, I want to help supplement their transportation costs by giving them a monthly transit credit. Investing in a renewed transportation workforce. That's where Spangon comes in. We do have the streetcar hub there. We do have, if we were to renovate that building and open that school, we could potentially train the next wave of Metro drivers, Metro Transit train operators, DC Circulator drivers, shuttle drivers, Metro Access drivers, any type of transportation agencies, including ride shares, teaching people the process to go through rideshare and limousine company and private transportation services. All of those would be invested in along with the renewed transportation workforce. And the last thing on the transportation platform is putting putting transportation network companies to work for the district residents. To work for district residents. That's big. You have Uber, you have Lyft, you have Empower, you have a ton of other rideshare companies that are coming out. DC does not have that type of regulation. I'm a big fan of how New York City does their rideshare certification, where those particular rideshare owners are licensed through the Taxi Limousine Commission, the TLC. So they're licensed through there. You have to go through that process, and that is who has checks and balances. Very often we see Maryland and Virginia drivers coming into the district, and that's fine. Not a problem with it. But they come into the district, it creates congestion. It creates a nightmare for traffic because they're not used to navigating the DC streets as a DC driver would. Because oftentimes they're picking up residents from places that are outside of the metro area of coverage. So you have drivers from Virginia, Maryland, and even DC, drivers that live here that are not familiar with going to parts of the city where, okay, I didn't know this was even over here, or I didn't know, that this street went this far back. So what we have is you have people getting lost, you have people getting assaulted, you have people getting carjacked, you have people who are causing accidents. A taxi limousine, a TLC or transportation network company, and allowing people to basically say, hey, if I want to drive for one of those rideshare companies, I got to sign up with the TLC. I got to sign up with the Taxi Cab Limousine, Commission. I got to sign up with them, and they're going to regulate what's going on in regards to, how my licensure is. But you'll be clear to go. I think that's big for the transportation aspect of my platform because, like I said, there are still places in the city where you can't get to on a bus. there are still residents in the city who have to walk X amount of blocks or XX amount of blocks in order to get to a metro station or in order to get to a bus stop that has service, especially when it's on a Saturday schedule. So the transportation woes that I have are transportation woes that I think the entire city may have, or a lot of the city may have. And I just want to create equitable access to all of the transportation measures that we have in the city. So we have two more platform pieces, and the next one is public safety. So very simple for public safety. Re-imaging our current approach to public safety. In order to find the root causes of violence and crime, we must consistently address public safety concerns, policing, and criminal justice shortcomings. So what I just said with that is there's a reason we have crime, poverty. There's a reason we have poverty, lack of resources, lack of education. Crime does not just spur out of nowhere. There is always a root cause to crime. And I'm a firm believer that the root of crime stems from the lack of basic human needs. People who commit crimes are usually victims themselves. They're often victims of inadequate housing. They're victims of unemployment, ineffective education, and we should treat petty crimes as such and promote civil productivity by re-imaging our current approaches to public safety. COVID-19 exacerbated a lot of what we see now in terms of crimes, violent crimes, and petty crimes. During the pandemic for last year, 2020 to 2021, we saw a 3% overall increase in violent crimes, and homicides in the city rose 14% in just 1 year. So based on what I'm saying, crime can be deterred by resources. Crime can be deterred by making sure that people are employed, housed, and taken care of, their basic needs. And I believe that all our families should be safe. And I believe that our families are safe, but we must do more to maintain the safety throughout all of the wards in the city, throughout every quadrant in the city. Because when violent crime increases, our first automatic thought is usually put more police officers on the street. However, that strategy is oftentimes ineffective and it adds a layer of tension to neighborhoods or areas that are already over policed to begin with. So this betrays the trust of the residents and it does more harm than good. So if I was to be elected as mayor, I would A, seek to decrease the percentage of violent crime, redevelop, redevelop or redesign the redevelop or redesign the juvenile criminal justice system, develop an intersectional approach to end repeat offender incarceration as well as mass incarceration, reallocate the MPD budget, require racial equity, anti-racism, and anti-prejudice training for all public safety and government workers, demilitarize our police department, especially when it comes to events that evoke the First Amendment, such as the Black Lives Matter protests or any assembly protests or peaceful demonstration. There's no reason for MPD to go into those peaceful protests or peaceful assemblies and pepper spray people and bully their way through, put up shields or harass people or treat it as if it's the next world war. So with all of those things going on, the last thing would be to launch an open data initiative. Far too often things occur within our system and there is no data behind it. Oftentimes many things happen and there's no particular data behind why it happened, when it happened, how it happened, and the data or videos or information is kind of left to the side until a narrative can be formed. And unfortunately, that's one of the biggest critiques that I have for the city in regards to public safety, making the data available so that people can make informed decisions and not just have to take the narrative of the public safety officials or the narrative of the administration that is currently in office. And last but not least, guys, city government. City government, city government, city government. The Wilson building, the John Wilson building. This goes directly into what my mantra for the campaign is: act right. Act right, accountability, communication, and trust. So, my job, if elected as mayor, would be to increase accountability, transparency, and equity throughout city government agencies. So, in recent years, we've seen city government agencies become riddled with corruption and scandal. Lack of accountability and lack of oversight has led to a lot of these agencies not functioning properly. And many of these agencies are essential to the livelihoods of district residents. And because of that, they should function properly and make sure that they service residents that require their help. We've seen government agencies fall short of effectively servicing residents due to lack of staffing or hires, impractical communication via obsolete mediums, as well as a lack of appointment times for residents. So there's no easy solution to rebuild or fix city government agencies, and it won't happen overnight. But if I was to be elected as mayor, I would be committed to cleaning up these agencies one by one. And some of these agencies, in no particular order, some of these agencies include the Department of Employment Services. There are people who are still waiting for retroactive benefits or claims from 2020 or from 2021, and they have yet to receive it. The Department of Employment Services does not communicate in an effective manner. That's what I spoke about with the obsolete mediums. Everyone doesn't have access to a computer. Everyone doesn't have access to internet. Everyone does not have access to email. Everyone, they rarely send out, snail mail anymore. There's no communication when it comes to phone calls. You get robocalls, and what if someone's not home at that time? Even those particular mediums are becoming obsolete. So we must find more effective ways to get the information and get the information out and communicate with our constituents and residents here in the district. The next agency will be the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. I spoke about not being able to get appointment times. I know personally when I went to renew my registration, for some weird reason, I was unable to do it online. It took me about 6 months to get a in person registration appointment. And if I hadn't been persistent, it probably would have taken longer. Other agencies are Department of Health, Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, the DC Housing Authority, and Department of General Services, which services a lot of our District of Columbia public schools, services a lot of our public buildings in regards to the general services and maintenance field. So those are some of the issues, or not issues. Those are some of the parts of my platform. Once again, it's education, housing, public health, economics, city government, public safety, and transportation. Those 7 areas are the most important for the district. And recently, I was featured in an article in the Washington Informer that talked about my time as an educator and where I stood on the education for my education platform. If you head over to my site, you'll be able to read the article in the Washington Informer. It is under my the press aspect of my it's under the press tab of my website, so you can actually go there and read the article. If you follow me on social media, you probably already have read the article. but it lets me, once again, I'm big on education. That's one of the main things that I think we need to desperately take a look at. And oftentimes we're starting to see that the candidates that we have for mayor now are not really providing you with a stance in regards to where they specifically stand. I believe I may be the first person to put my platform out on my website, and I did that to go hand in hand with the mantra that I'm giving: acting right, accountability, communication, and transparency. I'm being very transparent when I speak in regards to what I would like to see done in regards to the vision of the District of Columbia. I'm being very, I'm communicating to the constituents, all who want to basically say, what is he about? I'm communicating that. And I want people to be able to hold me accountable. If there's things that people don't necessarily agree with, a lot of these things, a lot of these things, I do not adopt a end all be all or my way or the highway mentality. I'm very open to discussing, the nuances of my platform with anyone, because at the end of the day, some people are everyone is making their decision about who they're going to cast their vote for on June 21st in the primary based on what they're saying, based on what they're seeing, based on how they're doing. So, with that being said, I want to tell everyone, thank you for coming out. If you have not donated to my campaign, please donate to my campaign. It's www.andrefordc.com. Please spread the word. If you are a DC resident, your contributions are matched 5-1. So, for example, if you donate $50, the District of Columbia will match me buy five to match your $50. They would match me $250 to match your $50. So essentially, everything is matched 5-1. So with that being said, thank you for coming out and joining me tonight. Be on the lookout for other platform talks and discussions. Be on the lookout for me coming through your neighborhood. Be on the lookout for me having events. All of that stuff can be found on my interactive website. Please check out my website at your perusal. And thank you guys for coming out.